if we use the restaurant metaphor, right? You have a chef, and ultimately that chef's job is to make the best possible meal. And the difference between making the restaurant successful versus not successful is how good that food is, right? And you can go to that chef and you say, hey, could you please go outside and stand with one of those like sandwich board signs saying, hey, check out my restaurant. And it's like, you absolutely could use one of the cooks in the kitchen to do that. But is that actually the best use of their time? Are they actually are they making the food better by doing that? If you only have two people in the restaurant, they should probably be focused on the food. If you have 10, 20 people, okay, it makes sense to have somebody focused on customer acquisition. It could be the same people. There's no obvious reason why they would be good at it, but maybe some of them will be. Or you could hire people who are explicitly focused on promotion, customer acquisition. And you're likelier to get those people to be more motivated, more focused, more specialized, etc.
Welcome to the Hypergrowth Experience. This is your host, Nima Gardide. Today, we're going to have Alexey Komissarouk on the pod. He's the ex-head of growth engineering at Masterclass, and he did similar work at Opendoor for quite a few years. I'm quite grateful for him for waking up super early in Japan. He's recently had a move there and has been living there for the past year or so with his partner and kid. I've actually had a pretty long history with him, and we've really been talking about growth engineering work, paid growth, and the connection between engineering and these channels for the past few years. And he's done a very good job at these organizations that he's been at, and I would consider them sort of the state of the art when it comes to the process that they implement and the way they run their teams on how to use engineering as a massive leverage point for helping marketers deploy their budgets better and think about the product and the top of the funnel all the way to retention in a systemic way and try to sort of run experiments. And if you're a technical founder or recently stopped being a technical founder, his path of going from the startup world into starting these sort of growth engineering teams at companies is quite attractive. He actually is really a big fan of hiring founders that have recently either sort of shut down their companies or moved on from their companies to be in these roles, technical founders that have a very strong sort of business mindset. He's writing a book on this matter in general, the growth engineering. It's a topic that is not really spoken about enough, in my opinion. There's not enough content out there on it, so I'm very happy that he's doing this. He's also one of the experts in the field, so I think it's going to be very helpful. I tried to get into it with him and got in there in the different aspects of what it's like to create a team like that in an organization, what should be in charge of, and how the organization should be built out over time. So if you're thinking about building one of these teams or thinking about how engineering can feed into your marketing organization, this should be a really good and interesting conversation for you. We start with him sharing his path from being a startup founder to leading these growth engineering teams at Opendoor and Masterclass, and what really attracted him to these fast-scale, fast-growing companies. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Here's Alexey.
So for me, growth engineering is sort of a retirement path for technical co-founders that have burned out. I did a lot of the traditional startup stuff, started a venture-backed company, raised a bunch of money, had a big co-founder breakout. I did a bootstrap company, which did moderately well. And then at some point I was just like, wow, this is really stressful. What's it like just having a job? All my college friends went to FANG and they seem pretty happy. I don't know that I want to go to quite a company that big, but what if I just had a job? And that was about 2016, and ended up joining Opendoor for 4 years and then Masterclass for 3. And fell in love with growth engineering because it's it's a lot of the early founder stuff of you have to go solve the business problem. You have to go figure out how to make things work. But also ultimately it's a form of engineering, and being good at engineering makes you significantly better at growth. And so for the last 3 years, I was in charge of the growth engineering department at Masterclass until very recently.
I like that positioning in general. I think there's a lot of paths founders of early stage companies can take. This is probably one of my favorite ones, especially for the technical founders. A lot of folks end up in product because they just want to make some decisions. But I'm curious how you think about that. But before we get into the role itself, or the sort of craft itself, really, could you tell us, just to set context, like what was the stage Opendoor was at when you joined? What were the challenges there? And then similarly, we'll get to Masterclass after that. But I want to maybe pause on Opendoor for a little bit. Give us sort of like a picture of when did you join? Why did you join that company to begin with? And what were the challenges?
I joined Opendoor in 2016. It was maybe a $500 million company. I think I was engineer number 15 or so. So Opendoor, for folks who don't know, is a company that will, like, the services, we'll buy your house so you don't have to deal with the pain of having to sell your house. And so you can have it for people, especially who are selling the house because they're moving, having the convenience of, you know, the price, you get the offer right away, you know exactly what it's going to move. It's not going to fall through is huge. On the flip side, as a business, that's a terrifyingly thin margin business. And so it's very important to acquire the customer as effectively and efficiently as possible. So when I joined, we were in the process of launching the third market. Opendoor has to go launch on a city-by-city basis because the process of purchasing homes is very different on a state-by-state and city-by-city basis. We were launching Las Vegas, and the problem that I spent the vast majority of my time working on was, hey, how do we more efficiently get people from where they've heard of us to where they've signed a contract with us? And that's everywhere from performance marketing to the landing page to the conversion funnel to telling us about your home to hopping on a call with you to make sure that you're getting all the touches you need from the sales and support people. Just optimizing every possible step in that entire funnel to ultimately optimize A, how many people sell their homes to us, and B, what our margin is going to be like on those homes and how the cost of acquiring the customer will impact that margin.
And so is that something like that the growth team was in charge of? Was the product team caring about this? Was it just the C-suite caring about these things? Like, how were the teams structured? There was only 15 engineers at the time. Were you on this project at first? Like, how, walk us through that part.
Absolutely. So Opendoor was, and I think largely still is, 4 business units. It's, again, you can kind of think of it as a marketplace because you have to acquire the home and then eventually you have to sell it. So the 4 business units are fundamentally the ones interacting with the seller, the ones interacting with the buyer, the ones interacting in the middle that have to actually go and clean up the home and make it ready for inspection. And then the data science or pricing team, which is responsible for figuring out how much can we actually offer on this house and how are we going to get all the financing to work for that. And so seller, buyer, homes, and pricing is roughly the 4 units. And then effectively, I was on the seller team for most of the time there. And then the seller team itself acted effectively. Effectively acted as a growth team. And the way to think about this is Opendoor is one of these products where the customer acquisition funnel is the product. It's not like you buy a home for us and then we need you to use it every month. Right? Like if you sold us your home, we're done. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. So it's the whole product is fundamentally like a growth, a funnel. And at the end of the funnel, at the end of the checkout flow, you're done. You have your home. You have a bunch of money in escrow. Yeah,
interesting. That business, that's like the whole business is the funnel. If the funnel works, like the business is working. So that makes a lot of sense. The service in itself is kind of like an acquisition service.
Exactly. So to your other question, like who cared about it? The C-suite cared about it. At the end of the day, our reporting was how many homes did we buy this month and at what margin? And the kinds of projects that I did. So when I first joined, the person running the business unit was JB, who was one of the co-founders. He was effectively acting as the PM, but he was, doing a lot of things. And so one of the first projects that I ended up working on was working with the seller salespeople. And at the time, the interface that they had was really painful. It was just something like in any startup, somebody built something super early on. It doesn't quite work, but it's what we have and let's keep going. And there would be things like, hey, this person hasn't signed their contract in 4 days. We should probably follow up with them. But there was no easy way to see that. And I think at the time, one of the best salespeople had organized a like spreadsheet where they were manually like duplicating the tracking of every single one of the homes assigned to them to make sure they knew when to follow up, which effectively means the salesperson spending a lot of time on bureaucracy as opposed to just, showing up to work and being like, all right, who are the 10 people I need to follow up with today? And so, one thing I would expect many people to say at this point is like, oh yeah, so you just integrated Salesforce? No, Salesforce would actually be a terrible idea. Salesforce really doesn't work well for a business like Opendoor. And I know that because we've spent years seeing if we can get it to integrate well, and ultimately like, no. And the answer there was to do something a bit more custom, which a lot of the same principles, but fundamentally gives somebody the dashboard that says, here's what's important to you today that you can follow up on. And so I built that. It was a pretty significant difference for the efficiency of our salespeople. I think one fun story from there actually is before I built it, I became one of our seller CX or salespeople. I think for a couple of weeks, 5% of the new homes that were coming into us in Phoenix, I was the salesperson for, so I had to call them. I had to go chase them. It was great. I bought this one house from this very friendly couple. It was fun.
And so you did that in order to learn the process and understand it very well?
Yeah, exactly. Because I was partnering with the head of that sales team. But at the end of the day, it's sort of still secondhand knowledge. I think I still got a lot more understanding by effectively being just doing the job, just to gain a better intuition.
So let's zoom out a little bit just to touch on Masterclass. So you were at Opendoor for 4 years. I assume that was in their sort of like hyper growth stage. Did they go public before you left, or
right after?
Were you there right after? So what was the state in Masterclass was in? Because I think they were around already for quite a while when you joined them, right?
Yeah, I think they were in a similar state valuation-wise. It was about a $500 million company. And they were at maybe 30 or 40 engineers, so a little bit larger, but similarly entering this hyper-growth stage of, especially this was at the start of COVID. And so as you can imagine, COVID, especially during the early days, people were stuck at home. And you can only watch so much Netflix until you feel bad about yourself. And then ultimately you want to say, cool, I want to make sure I'm doing something productive with my time at home. And then Masterclass was such a strong answer to that.
Yeah, that was I remember we were talking when you were already at Opendoor, and then the Masterclass change was pretty clear to me. But just maybe like zoom out on the career, and what was your logic in joining these companies? It sounds like the exact same sort of like moment. Why do you just like hypergrowth? What's going on? Do you like?
I do like hypergrowth. Masterclass was a particularly interesting thing because when I met the VP Eng and they started talking about the problems they had, incidentally, they ended up in the exact same tech stack. And it was like, well, how do we solve this and this and this? And I basically had exactly the answers because I had exactly those problems with the growth info tech stack at Opendoor. So it was this magical opportunity because, after you've worked somewhere for a while, you've accrued a bunch of tech that you understand you will never be able to fix. Right? You're like, yeah, no, we should have done it this other way, but there's no way we're going to do a 6-month project and fix this up. Like the value is not there. Like I understand what the elegant solution is now, but it's just not worth it. Versus you come to a company that's at the same stage and you're like, oh, you guys haven't solved that yet? Okay, well, here's the 4 pitfalls that we're going to avoid. Here's the thing that you really have to do that's going to make it significantly less painful for your lifecycle people to iterate or something like that, or make it significantly less painful to get your experiment analysis right. And so I think joining Masterclass was, for me, the difference between being, an IC and then an EM on that team versus running the engineering organization, with just an opportunity to do things right and to see what it's like to do it from scratch.
Yeah, and I think that's like a worthy cause for sure. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but it's quite painful to go through this stage with these companies where you're sort of like scaling up and going through this sort of mass hiring and then dealing with all sorts of problems, both on the people side, as well as just maintaining. How do you like manage all this growth? And
I love it, man.
This experience.
Yeah, I'm sure there's painful parts to it, but I love it. I think it's so much fun. I think it lets me get my like sort of co-founder like interesting problem solving head on. But at the end of the day, like it's not my company, right? So as much as I would like for it to succeed, and as much as I'm like stock incentivized for it to succeed, like I can go if I'm not on call, I'm turning my phone off, right? It's like I get to live closer to a normal life.
Yeah, yeah, I can feel that. Do you feel like there is just less an anxiety attached to it as well because you're not on the hook for it?
I think that was a big part of my motivation. And then also, like, if it's your company and, you argue with your co-founders and you lose the argument, you're like, we're going to fucking lose. The whole company's going to die because we made this stupid decision. And you're so like, it's your baby. Versus if you work them, we're like, you'd like to do the right thing, but if you get overruled, like, hey, like, that's cool. Like, I can live with that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I want to like maybe talk about that to some extent of what does it feel like to be overruled? Like, do you think that these companies had similar cultures when it came to that? Was there sort of like a consensus culture? Was there sort of like super top-down culture?
No.
Like, how did they work?
They were actually super different. Opendoor feels very East Coasty. Opendoor is very like disagree and commit and let's go, right? Like very comfortable with disagreement and then sort of moving forward and executing. Like Opendoor will tolerate some amount of dissent, and then at some point, hey, all right, let's all just keep going. Versus Masterclass is much more consensus building. I think much more of like an LA, like San Francisco company of like, hey, like, but have you checked in with this like ninth person who's like nominally related to this project that we should also check with? Which I mean, I appreciated both. It was nice to sort of experience the difference of being a manager in both. But yeah, very different cultures.
Do you feel like there's one that's inherently better than the other?
No, I think you just have to pick your what's the word? Yeah, you just have to pick what you're going to be unhappy about, right? Like, no culture is perfect. I think it's pros and cons in each case.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's like probably literature on both of these, and I have friends that run both types of companies, and I'm investors in companies that are basically on maybe both sides of these. And I would say there's probably like a third one. It's a little bit more like holacratic, trying to be basically not managing at all. But I don't love that one as much as I used to. I when I was younger, I thought that was awesome.
It's like communism. It sounds like a great idea.
Yeah. It just, they don't get anything done is the main problem. But the inherent thing you mentioned seems like pretty true to me, which is just pick it and then stick to it. And then you'll self-select the people that like that version of management and culture. And you'll end up being able to scale up a business that way. Let's go to sort of how you entered Masterclass. So you saw an opportunity to sort of build things in a way where all the mistakes you had learned from at Opendoor would not be repeated. So do you mind explaining maybe in a little bit more detail what those mistakes were in your opinion, and not mistakes or just like things you learned, I guess, through the process, and what you set up hopefully better at Masterclass as you did it, unless you think you found even more things.
No, I definitely found even more mistakes. Yeah, if you're not making mistakes, you're just not being introspective enough. I think, I don't know if this is the most interesting thing because it does get a little bit in the technical weeds, but Opendoor got into this place where we spent so much time maintaining and cleaning up the lifecycle integration, right? Where the means by which we got data into our like marketing automation platform, which at the time was Iterable, was just became kind of like the vast majority of the background jobs running in production. And at the time I was so adamant that like, listen, like you need to have real-time data in Iterable so that any email can be real-time. And in practice, like maintaining the sort of graph dependency between anything that can change in production and getting it into Iterable right away. And but now we rely on a new table that isn't getting updated, or this got migrated out. Ended up becoming this huge project versus The more reasonable way to do that for the vast majority of use cases is just to have a nightly sync and not to try to maintain this like real-time data export because it doesn't solve a real problem. Where ultimately the lifecycle team, realistically, for the vast majority of their emails, nightly is good enough.
Do you recommend some? Were you? I guess these tools started bubbling up in your masterclass journey. What were reverse ETL tools a thing when you were working at Opendoor or Masterclass? Were you building that type of stuff yourself?
Yeah, we built it ourselves. Well, we had Fivetran at least. So Fivetran was really nice for, and again, for folks for whom this is relevant. The problem that reverse ETL tools solve is you have a bunch of vendors and you need to get your data out to them. And the most naive thing you can do is you can write the code for that yourself. You can have the engineers write that yourself. You have to understand exactly what the Facebook or Google API is and put that all together. And then you have to maintain it as it changes. It's not terrible, but basically now you have some data engineer, some full stack engineer desperately trying to learn data engineering, like full-time or at least part-time maintaining that. Versus a reverse ETL will let you do it with just SQL, right? We'll just say, hey, I sit on top of your data warehouse, tell me the data that's interesting, and then I know how to take the SQL query with the right columns into the relevant places for Facebook and Google to know so that they understand which customers are converting. Or so I can send it to your marketing automation platform so they can learn all the right things about your customers, et cetera. So we did end up moving
just to go one level up for folks, SQL is the language in which you will ask a database for information and it comes back. If you're like a non-technical marketer, because we have
that's really one level up, my bad. This thing that you had to do with code can now be done by a data analyst or a technical PM or still an engineer, but that engineer is now spending a lot less time on it because the integration maintenance is being handled for them. And we did end up bringing Census into Masterclass, and I was quite happy with it.
Shout out to Census. They're friends of the pod. Into Masterclass, so you did decide not to build that again, which is great. And so are you still, even with these reverse ETL tools, do you think you should be going for like a nightly sync for these things? And just to address when you mention vendors, I assume you're talking about things like iterable, Facebook ads, Google ads, basically any marketing tool in your stack or product analytics tool or CRM and so on and so forth, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I think nightly is about right. You could do more frequent. I mean, I think the important thing is just not real time. Like you should not attempt to keep your lifecycle, your marketing automation platform tool real time. Because again, you're just going to spend a bunch of time chasing that dream. And it's actually not that valuable except for a small number of key emails that you want to send. And for those, just make sure that the data you have for those emails is available in real time.
Right. So unless it's transactional, you should not care about real-time data being available.
Yeah, we're getting really into the fine grains here. You could think of transactional and marketing emails are this weird spectrum. So for example, the welcome email, right? So somebody buys the product, you send them the receipt and then you say, hey, welcome to Masterclass. Here's 5 cool things to check out, right? You could argue that that's a transactional email because, well, they purchased and this is now what the product is. You could argue it's a marketing email because we're actually trying to tell you more about the product and explore other features. And so if it's kind of marketing, then the marketing team wants to be able to iterate on it. So then you put it in iterable. And then now you're in this world, but that email needs to go out right away when somebody's bought, right? So now you can't, but you want to say, hey, Nima. You don't want to say, hey, first name or hey, new customer. But Nima is the first name on the user profile, which we just said should be updated nightly, right? And you don't want to be one of those people sending a hey first name email. And so now you need to say, okay, this is the one exception where this email does need to know what your name is, even though maybe that isn't updated yet. And in cases like that, my recommendation, and again, we're getting super in the weeds here, but in that case, my recommendation is just to stick any of that extra context into the user has just signed up. Here is a welcome email event that you sent to iterable, rather than trying to update it properly through the user profile.
Gotcha. Yes, there are some like edge cases here, and you just have to figure out some creative solution out of the philosophical approach.
And there's and the challenge is like day one on the job, you there's no way I would have understood that. I think that this just comes from years of having to maintain that system at Opendoor and then at Masterclass, and realizing, okay, like I tried really hard to support this real-time invariant, and like the juice was not worth the squeeze. So there's all these heuristics. I mean, this one's specifically around lifecycle, but there's a lot about like experimentation as well. That you don't realize are important until, you're in a place that does it a certain way, and to change the way it will do it will be sufficiently painful, but you now realize that way is not optimal.
Yeah, the juicy things you learn with experience.
It's a weird niche.
Let's zoom out a little bit.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about growth engineering as a craft, and I think first of all, you're doing some writing, and I really appreciate you sharing this writing with me before it goes out about this specific type of role. And I'm quite excited about it because I think it's seldom talked about. And it's very unclear to people what that role actually means. It feels like one of those roles that became popular in vernacular, but no one understood what it actually meant. And so, I'm thinking like growth hacker or growth marketer, and these types of names that the job description was unclear for. So let's start with, what is the job description of a growth engineer in your eyes?
Yeah, I think a growth engineer is when like a growth hacker learns about CI/CD. Is maybe one way to put that.
What is CI/CD?
Continuous integration, continuous deployment, like a proper, the proper engineering way of getting things done. I think early on, a lot of companies will hire, what used to be called a growth hacker, which is, we don't have time for a proper growth team. We're just going to have one person and see what kind of crazy magic they can do. It's like, hey, we got this 20-year-old who just flamed out of YC. Let's see what they can figure out for us. It is the typical stereotype. And honestly, that works surprisingly well, like more often than you would expect. But then what happens is the company grows, and you can't just have a one-man marching band doing growth anymore, because you have stakeholders and you have priorities, and like you're a real company now. And so then you build a proper growth org. You have a head of growth, you have a product manager, you have performance marketing, and ultimately you start having some designers and engineers who are fully dedicated to growth. And the growth engineering, fundamentally, like the easiest way to describe it, it's the engineers working on growth, as opposed to like actually building the product, or as opposed to working on the platform or infrastructure team, right? It is the engineers who work with the growth product manager, potentially directly with the head of growth, to move forward the business's ability to improve on all the growth metrics, which is acquisition, retention, engagement, referrals, etc.
How is that different from people that just work on product itself? Like, why aren't they focusing on those exact metrics?
It's a great question. I think it's, if we use the restaurant metaphor, right? You have a chef, and ultimately that chef's job is to make the best possible meal. And the difference between making the restaurant successful versus not successful is how good that food is, right? And you can go to that chef and you say, hey, could you please go outside and stand with one of those like sandwich board signs saying, hey, check out my restaurant. And it's like, you absolutely could use one of the cooks in the kitchen to do that. But is that actually the best use of their time? Are they actually are they making the food better by doing that? And I mean, if you only have two people in the restaurant, they should probably be focused on the food. If you have 10, 20 people, okay, it makes sense to have somebody focused on customer acquisition. It could be the same people. There's no obvious reason why they would be good at it, but maybe some of them will be. Or you could hire people who are explicitly focused on promotion, customer acquisition, and you're likelier to get those people to be more motivated, more focused, more specialized, etc.
I appreciate your metaphors. I know you have another one, so I'm just going to explicitly ask you to tell the other metaphor, which is the Hollywood metaphor.
Oh, the Hollywood metaphor, yes. Let me take you one step from here to there. So the counter argument with The restaurant metaphor is like, okay, yeah, you need somebody to acquire customers, but that's just called marketing. Like, why do you need engineers? And engineers are not like cooks. Engineers are a very special kind of human being, fundamentally, especially in a company, because engineers make whatever process they're in better. Like, that is fundamentally their job, right? Like, engineers come to finance and they say, cool, all your reports are automated now and like triple checked. Engineers come to customer support and they say, cool, we've like done a bunch of autoresponders and ChatGPT has responded to your stuff now. Engineers come to marketing and say, cool, we've built you a lead score that's automatically bidding on Google and Facebook or whatever, right? So engineering is not just one department. Engineering can go to any function within the company and improve the efficiency of that business unit. And to some extent, you can do that off the shelf, right? You do not need engineering to do any of that. But once you get an engineer's attention, like, they can take you beyond where you can get to with purely off the shelf no-code tools. So the superpower of engineering is, in the market and recent world, engineering is eating the world. Like, whatever work function engineering gets involved with, they can take it to the next level. So let's start with that. And then let's talk about what's the difference between an engineer taking the product to the next level, where usually the product is just, for a SaaS company, the product is what the engineering team is building. Like, there's not, in the Opendoor case, that's not true. The product is we bought your house, right? But sometimes the product is engineering. In the growth sense, the product is how efficiently are we acquiring the customer? Now, and the ways of working are very different, because in the core product sense, to go back to the restaurant metaphor, you have this head chef who has a very strong opinion. His last restaurant had a Michelin star, and he'll talk about exactly, he knows exactly what to do. And the role of the cooks is to execute beautifully. And occasionally they'll have input. They say, what if we add some more cilantro to this meal? But by and large, their ability to work is determined by how effectively and with what level of precision they can follow the head chef's recommendations. To take us to the Hollywood metaphor, the engineers here are actors, right? There's a screenwriter, there's a showrunner, and they came up with the beautiful script. Aaron Sorkin knows exactly what the screenplay should be. He needs you to say the lines exactly as they are written because he is a genius. And that's a lot of what core product is like. Like, if you've ever used an iPhone app that somebody really, really loves, it's beautifully polished, it's because the engineers working on that are executing. The thing that makes them great is how well they are executing at their craft. And that is not nearly as true for growth engineering. Growth engineering is closer to reality TV, where there's still a showrunner, there's still a broad general direction about where you're going, but there's a lot more autonomy in figuring out exactly what the right answers are and exactly what should be done, right? If you're spending a bunch of your time telling your reality TV cast members exactly what to say, like, that's kind of a weird way to run a reality TV show. Growth engineers have a lot more autonomy to figure out what happens. And the reason that is, by the way, is because it goes a lot quicker, right? The amount of experiments and work that a growth engineer is supposed to do on any given time period is much more, right? Because we don't know what's going to work. It's not worth executing everything to the point where John Gruber would be super happy about it. It's like, let's just try 10 landing pages. Let's see which one of them work. And then we'll make it nice if we're actually seeing that it has that impact. And at that capacity, the product manager just cannot babysit every single project, right? Some of those projects have to be engineers where they're both A, coming up with the ideas, and B, making all the interesting small decisions about what to do. And it's not all going to make it, right? Like, a good experiment success rate is 30 or 40%, and that's fine. And that's also how reality TV works, right? Like, not all of the hours of film that you've got on Survivor are making it too. It's just, can we figure out which parts that work and weave them into a coherent narrative? And that's how we acquire the customer.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that stood out in that. So, first of all, I think that's a pretty good metaphor, especially the reality TV stuff. In this variation of how you think teams should be structured for growth, are there growth product managers, or are
Absolutely.
you thinking, okay, so and their role is to still dictate at least the structure in which you're running the experiments, and I assume hypothesis definition, but are the engineers coming up with the solutions walk me through how the sort of orchestration works there.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm describing to you, this reality TV world is the ideal, right? That is not how you start. At the end of the day, let's say on a quarterly level, the head of growth and the relevant product prime manager and the engineering manager get in a room and say, hey, what is the bet we want to make with this team? It's like, well, we think our checkout flow has too many steps is a bet. Or we think our homepage doesn't explain the value add properly. Or we think our onboarding process is doesn't do well for people on mobile, right? Let's find the big theme of the problem that we want to tackle. And then let's go have a big brainstorm about all the engineers, all the designers, all the relevant people, and come up with a big backlog of ideas that might be interesting. And then the product manager with other stakeholders will go and prioritize that and go here's the actual bets, here's the actual idea that seem interesting. Let's turn these into designs, let's turn these into specs so we can actually execute on them. So if you follow this process, it doesn't sound that different than a traditional product engineering path. You have a bunch of ideas and you're executing on them. I think the distinction becomes, how many of the specific bets are coming from the engineers versus things that, the product manager, the head of growth, the engineering manager had basically already known they wanted to do. So what percent of the ideas are truly coming bottoms up? And then over time, a single product manager can handle more engineers because the engineer can take the project further, can do, instead of going and being the product manager being the person in charge, they're the person orchestrating and they're the person approving instead of the person doing. So the engineer can go partner with the designer, figure out, iterate on the design, bring something to the PM to approve. The engineer can execute and then bring it to the PM to say, hey, do you want a spot check? Does this seem right? And then the engineer can productionize, turn on the feature flag, wait some time, look at the results, and then say, hey, product manager, here's how I think this result looks like. Here's a short write-up of how I think this experiment went and recommended next steps. What do you think? And over time, as their growth engineers get mature enough, more of them can own that experiment full funnel in this sort of mini PM way. And that allows the PM to do higher level work. You don't start that way. You start more or less in a tops down PM driven way, the same you would in core product.
It feels like you're not only talking about autonomy, which feels like a sort of a cultural difference or almost like a personality difference, but you're also talking about ownership, where the growth or the engineer in this scenario is less of an executioner and more of a thinker. So they will own the solution to some extent. And you're saying the extent in which they would own the solution ideation and sort of project management of it increases over time. And is that sort of the seniority on a growth manager? Is it a seniority or the longevity of the organization and the size of the organization, all of the above? What is that sort of when you say in the beginning versus later?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I would say, right, a mature growth organization is going to have more people operating in this capacity. But also, and this is important to call out, not every senior engineer is senior because they're really autonomous as a business problem solver. Some engineers sort of don't go that way and are still incredibly valuable because of their high ability to execute or their deep knowledge of the tech stack. So, there is not a monolith for what a senior engineer looks like in growth, but the kind that you will see a lot more in growth than core product is this sort of mini PM model where they can just, if we're aligned on what the big idea is, they can own experiments and they're coming up with a lot of the experiments they end up running. This is sort of the mold of IC that I ended up working as at Opendoor.
Yeah, that just makes a lot of sense. So I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I've been in that position you're talking about, but I've never hired for it. How do you hire for these types of folks? They feel very hard to find.
I mean, just look for YC companies winding down.
Just ex-founders.
So ex-founders is the easiest way. Honestly, yeah, actually, yes. Because they are most excited about it. The two other ways are, one, people who have done this job elsewhere, people who are coming from growth companies with strong engineering reputation. Just bringing somebody else in to share the culture they had at Pinterest or somewhere like that is valuable. Or you can train, right? Like the other thing that works relatively well is bringing in new software engineers, either if they're straight out of college or if they had a mid-career switch and either to boot camp, wherever. They aren't broken yet. And what I mean by that is after working at a couple of years in a traditional product engineering role, engineers learn a number of bad practices. Not bad globally, but certainly bad for growth engineering, right? They learn that in order to get a promotion, they should drive a complicated project with lots of stakeholders, and they should be able to say how effectively they did this complicated thing, right? It's like, why does Google have 4 systems that do everything? Because everyone needed that promo. And for growth, that's actually pretty bad. Like I don't need the system to be complicated. I need it to make us money. Like I need it to be impactful. And engineers are respected in product and platform engineering for the beauty and elegance of their code. And I will happily take shit code that made us millions of dollars. But that is a very hard pattern to unlearn because there is this understanding that is what success looks like. And so you can either spend time trying to change the mindset of existing engineers or bring in engineers that don't have that mindset, either because they're former founders, so obviously they have the impact mindset, or they're coming from a place where they already have that mindset, or they just don't have a mindset yet and you have a chance to start from scratch.
So it's interesting because at a high level, I agree with you, but there's a difference between writing crappy code and writing overly complex code. Like I think there is code you can write that has very little bugs, it's well written, it's non-complex, solves a business problem very well, and it's written fast, compared to like writing it in like a script kiddie hacky way, right?
Absolutely.
Like, and I assume you don't want the script kiddie hacky way. You want the sort of like elegant, fast solutions for the problem at hand, as opposed to the complex solutions that solves all the problems and then 20 more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the reason that I say I'm fine with crappy code is because from the vantage point of product engineering, anything less than the bar that they're used to is script kiddie code, even though it's perfectly reasonable, right? I think my job is to just lower the bar and say, okay, well, do we need 100% test coverage for this thing that is 80% likely to be gone in 2 weeks? Are you sure? Can we not test it manually once for this release? It's no, here's the code coverage bar at our company. Sorry, we pride ourselves on our engineering excellence, right? So I'm not trying to say the code should be completely gonzo. No, but there's definitely engineering standards inside of growth as well, right? We don't want to bring the website down any more than you do. It's just that the happy medium is much lower than where you are in a product world. And so I end up being the one advocating for scrappiness. But no, we're not hiring 12-year-olds that have never worked on a production environment, right?
I just wanted you to clarify that because I assume that's not what you're advocating,
Fair.
All right, so the next area I wanted to focus on with you is just even zooming back further. So I like that we keep going in and out, and that's kind of the vibe I like having. If you were to, at a high level, give me your sort of here are the 6 or 7 or 10 or 20 things that need to exist in terms of the best stack to have access to when you are trying to build a proper growth engineering infrastructure. And I assume you're going to come back with something well, you don't need all of this in the beginning. You need probably X and Y, and then you're going to add all of these things on top of it. And, feel free to go that route. But given that now you've done this thing twice and you clearly have used different tools over the 7 years that you've been doing this type of stuff, what if you were to start from scratch, walking into a new team, new company, new product, what would be your ideal stack?
Let's start at the very beginning. The first problem that you have as a growth engineer is not what you can do. It's what other people can't do unless you help, right? And that is the marketing automation platform or the lifecycle platform or the CRM in this case. Like you need to, I think before you do anything, it is valuable to unblock entire organizations that can run autonomously once you have gotten them from 0 to 1. So the first thing that I would do, or I mean, not the first thing if you don't have a product, but the first thing now that you have a working product is I would set up a marketing automation platform like Customer.io, Iterable, Braze, Klaviyo, any one of these. Because now marketing can hire a whole department of people just churning out and iterating on emails and push notifications and SMSs, which will ultimately and then they can A/B test them and they can improve them. That will have an impact on your business. That is the single highest leverage thing you can do, because now all of these people can execute with minimal support from you. Versus if you were trying to A/B test emails by yourself, I mean, yeah, you could do it, but it starts to get really annoying if you're the bottleneck for every single email going to production. Now, what do you need to set up that marketing automation platform? Well, you need two things, right? You need, when a user does a thing, you need to tell the platform, so, hey, this user just entered their email. Oh, but then they didn't purchase. Okay, well, cool. Maybe we should send them an abandoned cart email. So now somewhere in your production, you need an event that says, hey, the user entered the email. We would like our analytics system to know about it. And then our analytics system will tell the marketing automation platform, or our event routing platform will tell the marketing automation platform, but also our event routing platform will tell the analytics system about it. So you can write a query that says, hey, how many people entered their email today? What is our conversion rate from somebody landing on the homepage to entering their email? And then finally, just on a very early on, you want an easy way to answer those questions. So you want an analytics tool. A lot of people use Google Analytics early on because it's free. I think I've seen Amplitude be really popular. I'm an Amplitude fan as well. It's just a place where in a self-serve way, people can say, hey, show me the funnel between this and this. And how does it differ for mobile versus desktop? Or how does it differ for paid versus organic traffic, et cetera? So the three things I would start with is maybe the four things is some super easy way to send events. Hey, user did thing out into the event routing system. Then you want an event routing system, which by far the most common one is Segment, which does a really nice job of connecting everything. But you can also just kind of hand roll something early on. Then you want an analytics system that just lets you answer questions in a self-serve manner. And then you want your marketing automation platform so that people working on the lifecycle side can be relatively autonomous and execute on their own. Yeah. And there's a ton more we can add to that, but I think if you're just serious,
that's the core of it.
A, B, that will get you decently far. And this is before, we haven't even talked about experimentation or data warehouse at this stage.
And for this stage one, which is kind of firing of the events before it gets to stage two, which is kind of the event routing. Are you a fan of those products in that space, like Avo, where they're trying to create some level of certainty about what properties you're sending, how often you're sending them, and code safety around sending events? Or have you not really explored that area?
I hadn't heard of that tool in particular. I think it's really important that the high fidelity events get sent accurately, right? I think the way we did this at Masterclass is there were 5 to 10 quote unquote gold standard events where these events absolutely positively have to get out there because it's what Facebook and Google are optimizing on, for example. And so we had much stricter monitoring and enforcement and integration tests around those standard events than everything else going on.
You're just writing tests for them. Yeah, Avo is basically a tracking manager. It has observability, and you can generate sort of SDKs with type safety, basically.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah. The equivalent that I've seen for this is Iteratively, which got bought by Amplitude and is now Amplitude Data Governance. I haven't seen Avo. We ended up building a bunch of that in-house. I think, if I were going from scratch today, I would look at some of those tools. I think that's really nice to have. I think type safety is a really valuable way to reduce the likelihood that, you accidentally delete an event that you're sending millions of traffic of dollar spend to. Millions of dollars of paid traffic through. Yeah, if it's easy enough to do it on day one, certainly do it on day one. If not, then at least bring it in once you're really scaling up your paid traffic.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then step 2 is sort of the routing step. I think you mentioned segment. There's like, obviously nowadays RudderStack is like a hot player, but there's like a million of them.
I mean, in a sense, Google Tag Manager is one of these. Like, it's not my favorite, but the tag managers and the routing things are kind of different versions of the same product. And the whole purpose with these is, at the end of the day, you're going to be sending data from a bunch of places. You'll be sending it from your front end, from your back end. You'll be sending it from Stripe or wherever. And you need that data to get into a bunch of places. You need it in your marketing automation platform. You need it to your ad partner. You need it to your data warehouse. You need it to your analytics tool. And you could write each of those integrations manually, but my God, you will drown over time. And so just having a single place where all the events go in here, and then we'll write some logic that says who deserves which events, and then they'll go out. Just having that standardized makes your life so much easier.
Yeah, and unsurprisingly, I think they charge a lot of money for this, but it is so foundational to the stack that I think it's totally worth it.
Well, it depends on your customer LTV, right? Like if your customers are expensive, then on a per event basis, it's not a huge deal. If your customers, if you are at a place where like your average LTV isn't that high, then maybe you need to hand roll, or maybe you need to find an alternative. I'll give you an example. So at Masterclass, we use Segment. One of the issues we ran into is a lot of our page views are SEO page views. The Masterclass is a decently large SEO footprint. But the SEO traffic, unsurprisingly, does not convert as well as the homepage traffic, right? Because if you're Googling, how to cook an egg, like, I don't know that you're ready to pay $180 a year for Masterclass quite yet, versus if you go to masterclass.com. But we still have Segment on there. And like the conversion rate is sufficiently low enough that like Segment on the SEO pages is like kind of a non-trivial expense. And so some of the things that we've looked at are like, well, what if we just sample this traffic? Or what if we, for the SEO pages, just go to Google Analytics, which is free. And so if the rest of my business was similar, where it was SEO oriented, like probably I would not recommend Segment, because it just ends up being prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, and there's certainly trade-offs, but it just feels like such a hard thing to roll on your own. Having done that before, I don't really wish it on anybody.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, it is like something you should really seriously consider. Okay, so that's the second step. And then the third step is effectively choosing the tools in which these routers are going to send data to. And you mentioned sort of like the first one being something like Iterable, or basically like some form of a lifecycle marketing toolkit. Or like this first one being an analytical, self-serve analytical tool, and then a lifecycle marketing analytical toolkit. Yeah, just Google Analytics being the free one that everyone uses. It's fortunately being sunset with a better version of it, which is much more akin to Amplitude. How much of your time do you spend as a growth engineer, making these reports on these tools themselves? Like, let's talk about the sort of training part of this, because there are non-technical people who don't understand how data stitches together, and some of these concepts are new to them. Do you spend a good amount of time doing that? Whose job is that on the growth team? Should everyone know already? How do you think about that? Yeah.
So I think I have a bit of a hot take here. I end up spending quite a bit of time in Amplitude, and in something like Looker, or in something like Mode, or Numeracy, where I'm writing raw SQL, right? Like I think one of my superpowers is like, I can just go answer that question in 5 minutes. Where a bunch of people have been debating and be like, let me just check. Like in the middle of a meeting, I'll be like, actually, like we've been arguing about this thing, but here's the query. And actually, like it's pretty straightforward what the answer here is. Like I'll be that asshole who does that. And that comes from Opendoor, where Opendoor was an incredibly data-driven culture. And so there was this big push, like the data science was so important to Opendoor. There was a lot of SQL fluency and competence. So I really picked that up there. I think so my hot take is, yeah, actually everybody should be in these tools, because otherwise we're just guessing about the business. And there's two levels of competency there, right? Level one of competency is, can you do it in Amplitude, or can you do it in the WYSIWYG tool, where, you're auto-completing event names, you're saying this event and then this event and then this event, but for these features, what does it look like? And I've run these trainings for my engineers at Opendoor and at Masterclass. I think that's a really important skill to have. I think the PMs are doing it. I think the PMs should certainly spend some amount of time in Amplitude, so they're not, because if they don't, then every time they have an interesting question, they need to go to their data analyst and say, hey, actually, can you answer this question for me? And now it goes on a backlog of an overworked person, and it'll get answered in an order of magnitude of days, not like hours or minutes. And so being able to self-serve for the 80% easiest questions you're ever going to ask is a really, really important tool for being autonomous, as you said. So I think PM should be doing it a ton. I think growth engineers, as they become more mature, should be doing it more, because that's how they develop intuition. That's how they can answer questions. And the next level beyond that is, okay, but can you write actual SQL? Because at some point, you will run into something that is sufficiently complicated to answer in Amplitude, where the right answer is to just actually go into the data warehouse and ask the question there. And that's where the data analysts live. The data analysts fundamentally have answers to they have access to all of the data. And so they can answer the more complicated questions. And I will go in the data warehouse. I don't care. For me, it's super helpful. And I don't mind spending 15 minutes coming up with a quick poll. I think my SQL has gotten good enough over the years that I can do that. And I try to help my growth engineers do that as well when it comes up. But honestly, I would settle for just people being comfortable going into the Google Analytics, going into the Mixpanel, going into the Amplitude, and answering that first 80% of questions.
Yeah, and I think that there is a prerequisite for that to be sort of trustworthy. And even if I know how to use Amplitude, the thing needs to work, which is kind of the naming of these things and the events being understandable. Have you over the years sort of decided on some nomenclature, some naming system that you follow whenever you are naming events? What is the process you generally recommend when it comes to tracking, such that people can, do that autocomplete in a safe way and think that they're looking at the right thing when they're looking at it?
There's two ways to approach this. The way that most companies do it is they don't have anything and people just do stuff. And then over time, it gets so painful that you spend a quarter or two cleaning it up. And then you bring in this thing that says, okay, here's how we name the things, and here are the key events, and let's go delete all the events that aren't key so the autocomplete doesn't lie to you, right? And let's go down to the actual 50 to 100 events that are real. And that was that was Q3 and Q4 of Masterclass. It was a lot of fun. But if you want to avoid that, the thing you can try to do is early on try to establish the standards. Hey, here are the events. Here's using AWA or something. Here's the event registry. Here's the there's a review process to add in a new event. All events need to be somewhat same. I mean, the challenge is it's a little bit heavy. And early on, if the company doesn't quote unquote we don't know if this company is real yet, it's a waste of time. And so ideally you do that up front, but in practice, there will come a time where you need to say, okay, guys, we got to do a cleanup. And the thing you can do before a cleanup in something like Amplitude is to say, hey, here are the 10 events that are really important. We promise these 10 are legit. And we'll just name these, in Amplitude as gold, or gold plated, good, standard, trustworthy, right? And so just use these 10 events, and everything else, we don't quite promise, but at least we can promise about these 10. And then when you have time, you can go back and do a full thorough cleanup and, a taxonomy and make that clear going ahead. But it's hard to do if you're not a real company, because that's not going to make or break the business. Yeah,
totally. And so you do things like unit tests and integration tests for those, let's say, gold events. But the rest, who knows?
Integration tests.
It'll take time. Integration
tests. Integration tests, right? What you want to do is, at some level of maturity, you want to have a test that says a customer can sign up and all the right things happen, right? You want to be able to say, okay, They go on the landing page, they hit the big red button, they pick a plan, they go through the checkout, they enter the fake credit card, and they purchase. And while that happened, here's all the events that needed to fire and run. And also at the end, the user needs to look like this, and they needed to have gotten this email, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I'm not a fan of having too many tests, especially in the growth surface area, because they'll tend to be fragile as you iterate on the process. But there are some number of basic things that must be accomplishable. And signing up is a pretty important one.
Yeah, and I think to your earlier point, the importance of these events getting to the ad networks is so big that the failure scenario, I think, is worth the time to maintain some tests on these sort of like events that are being optimized towards, that it'll just save the company so much money, that the sort of like added, let's say, a friction to iteration is probably worth the money that you'll save, messing up these events.
Yeah, exactly. Like at the point that you're, sending non-trivial amounts of traffic, at the point that, an hour of downtime is like non-trivially pricey to you, you need to put in A, integration tests to reduce the likelihood of breakage, but also B, monitoring, right? That says, hey, like, this event hasn't fired in like 35 minutes. Do you think nobody bought it? Or do you think something's gone wrong with the release? And you want the ability to roll back quickly. Ideally, you have a full stack monitoring tool that's, starts basically at the paid ad campaign all the way down to like, what's the CPA for it? Like, where are users dropping off in the funnel, so that when you learn that something is broken, you know where it broke, and that investigation time can be shorter.
And is there like sort of like a human level naming convention you like, or your main point is like just come up with some standard and you're good enough? Because I know Segment has this sort of like object verb approach, or object action sort of naming system. I was just about to say, we use the Segment one. I like the Segment one. Same.
I think, and then you have to figure out what your specific areas are.
Most people understand it.
Yep. It's like this object just verbed, right? This order is completed. And then over time, you can get a little fancier. You can say like, oh, this was like from a landing page, or you can say, oh, this was right. Like you can start to add more to your taxonomy, but object verb is a really good start. Yeah,
that's an interesting one, because I think it's like human readable. I like that a lot.
The other reason you want to get this right is if you're ever going to be on devices, right? I think at Masterclass, we had order completed and we had completed order at some point. And it's like, where's completed order? It's like, oh, it's firing on an old version of the iPhone app that we can like never get rid of now, right? Because it's just an old version and we're just going to support it. So especially if you're going to be on devices, like you want to try to get that right up front, because that cleanup's going to be costly.
No, that's so painful. I feel for you. Some of these you can't even fix up. So that's a very, very good point. Okay, so let's say you have all of this. You have a way to send events to some router, to some analytics tool, to some lifecycle marketing product. What's next? What are the one or two levels of abstraction that you can take us to before we wrap this up?
So the next few tools that I would add would be one, I would add feature flags or A/B testing, experimentation tooling. These days there's EPA, StatSig, Optimizely full stack is sort of the one of the fancier, pricier players. So I would add some sort of feature flag and experimentation tooling, because that allows you to actually run your experiments and show your impact. I would add a data warehouse, which is sort of implied here, but that's ultimately where all of the data is going to sit, and that's where analysts will live, and that's where a lot of your data science models will work from. And then I would add a monitoring solution, which is to say, so now that you have the events flowing through, when they break, you want to know, and you want to be, woken up when something is broken. You want to have that level of comfort beyond just testing, that you want to have that level of comfort beyond just testing, that when something breaks, you're going to know. But at the very least, if I haven't heard of a purchase in an hour, I will know. And it will, if I'm on vacation or if I'm hiking, my boss will, this will escalate in a safe way that we will catch this issue in a timely manner. So monitoring platform, I don't like Datadog or something more marketing specific. Let's see. Yeah, experimentation, data warehouse, and monitoring, I would say, are the next three. Then
What are
you may
the
want to
other
reverse
than
ETL.
Datadog?
Other than Datadog, which ones do you like?
I like Datadog.
Yeah. Datadog's good. It's a little pricey. We were using New Relic. New Relic has an offering for this at Masterclass. I also like, I mean, it's one of my investments, but I like this company called FunnelGuard, which specifically sits on top of like Facebook and Google on one side and then ingests your segment on the other side and gives you that full funnel view.
Yeah, well, I like those guys too. We've ended up building a lot of that in-house.
Yeah. A lot of bigger places end up building that in-house just because it's so valuable. I think the reason I ended up using FunnelGuard was like, oh, great, this will save me a quarter worth of engineering. Fantastic. Yeah, please plug it.
And I'm sorry, so you were going on, so data warehouse, I assume there is some like tooling on top of that. That in itself feels kind of shared between product and growth.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The data warehouse is ideally not owned by growth engineering. Like the growth engineering is a customer of the data warehouse. I mean, also like of all of these things, growth engineering's job is not to own tools to say they own tools. Like ideally other teams can own them, and growth engineering can simply be a customer. If there's a data org, an analytics org, like a platform org, that's always great. But the data warehouse, like as you're scaling up Series A, Series B, like early on, what do? Just run a bunch of queries on production or like a production replica, and it's fine. But then you bring in a like real analysts, and they're disgusted by this, and they say, no, we need to be running an ETL pipeline that like creates a really nice view of the customer that makes all these queries easy. It's like, okay, sure. But now we need a data warehouse.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think quite often we are working with some data engineering and science team that just doesn't touch growth. And so we are effectively a customer to them. And then we end up producing some DBT models for them quite frequently and sit on top of their infrastructure, which works quite well for us, I think. And I love being a customer of a well-run data team.
Exactly.
But sometimes you just don't have that team, and you're effectively that team. But part of the work. And then you just touched on reverse ETL. You had mentioned census. Just to be like a little completionist here, did you look at other products?
Not at the time. It was pretty early on. I think today I would take a look at High Touch as well. Any others people should be looking at?
No, actually, I only know of those two. I'm sure there are other players, but
they really own this market. Good for them.
Yeah, the both of them just really.
And we're in the same reverse ETL bubble.
Yeah, we are. I think that stack really sort of fits for me. How do you think about these companies like Segment moving to become what they call themselves, sort of like customer data platforms instead of routers, where they're trying to maintain effectively a copy of your customer, right? So like, I don't know if you've seen the profiles section of personas.
Yeah, personas.
I'm forgetting the name of the personas. Yeah, they're effectively trying to get you to do some of that reverse ETL into Segment itself, keep an updated version of the user or the profile of your customers within Segment such that they can enable all this sort of stuff. Like, do you want these companies to be your piping? Do you think they should solve this problem? How do you feel about that? I'm just curious. I'll maybe voice my opinion after.
This is one of my sore spots, man. You really got me on this one. All right. So first, let's take a minute and define CDP, because it's this term everybody throws around. And it took me so long to understand what the hell it actually meant. All right. So a CDP is a customer data platform, I want to say. My best understanding of what a CDP is it's one SQL table that's very wide that basically says, okay, one row is a customer, and here's everything we know about this customer. And that might include which campaigns they've clicked, like anything we know from third parties. Like we know this is like a woman in their mid-30s living in Idaho that's really into sports or something, right? Like maybe we've got that from a third party. We know all of their interesting activity on this platform. Ultimately, we have this very wide thing that's like, hey, here's everything useful we might know about this customer that we could use for better targeting, that we could use to send emails. But it's fundamentally just one very wide table. And early on, if you were to produce this table somewhere, the data warehouse makes a ton of sense because that's where you have all of the data. And in my experience, the way we've largely worked with the reverse ETLs is first we've written like whatever the reverse ETL view in our data warehouse, and then that's largely what we're sending out in the reverse ETL. Like that's the basis for what we're sending. Now separately, Segment now claims it's a CDP, which is not true the way I have ever used them, right? Because to be a CDP, you would want data that we only have in our production data warehouse, in our production, and therefore sync to our data warehouse. And there's just no way that data has gotten ingested into Segment. Like Segment just has the like a bunch of identifies and like events.
Yeah, they have this now, by the way. They are solving for this.
Right. But, so as a Segment or now Twilio like shareholder, yes, absolutely. This is a great place to expand. Like it's an adjacent market. Of course, you should be going after it. As a customer, it's like you do one thing well. Like please, just like, can I use the tools that are good for everything? And I think we played with personas a bit. I think at the time it wasn't mature enough. I haven't taken a look in maybe a couple of years. If it's gotten better, maybe, but like that's not what I want from Segment. I mean, Segment also has a marketing automation tool now, which okay, great, but like so Segment wants to be HubSpot basically, or wants to be one of these like mega platforms that just does everything, which worth trying, but like at least as of today, not what I want from them.
Yeah, and I think this goes to this problem of like trying to grab a business and make more money out of it and trying to expand across this sort of core team, which is the data team.
I mean, and Amplitude is doing a similar thing, right? Like Amplitude wants to be Segment now.
Yeah. And I think like, I don't love that as someone who has been able to like actually love the separation of these things because they make me just trust them more. It's like, okay, you're very good at this thing. I would like, that's lovely. I want you to spend all your engineering power and efforts being very good at this one thing. And it's how I felt with Mixpanel as a marketer and as a product person when they started doing everything. They added push and email and so on and so forth. That it just diluted the value of the core thing, which was its analytical capabilities. And then Amplitude came and just ate its lunch. And so I feel that that's happening to Segment, and that's why they're weak, and that's why a company like Rudderstack and a couple of others are competing well in the space. But I'm glad I'm not alone in this view.
Yeah, I think my approach is like, that's nice. I'm just going to use you for the basic stuff, and then like I'll give you one example. Before we pulled in monitoring, before we rolled out our own monitoring, we realized Amplitude now is a monitoring product, where you can write a query, and if that query changes by like enough, then they'll email you. But A, it's only hourly, B, it's only events you send, and then C, it's only email. So like it's no Datadog, right?
Yeah.
But I appreciated it. We were beta customers of it for a couple of months. Like I think it was a decent stopgap while we actually like picked out our like longer term monitoring strategy. But yeah, like as a company, it makes sense to try to go after an adjacent market. As a purchaser of these tools, I'm just going to use whatever actually makes sense for each of the problems I have.
Yeah, and I think it's a feature of the SaaS market, right? Because if you're in an enterprise already working with Amplitude, it's actually much easier for me to sell you up on this new feature than it is for you to go after and find some new observability tool for your growth team. There is just procurement problem. So there is like systemic reasoning for this as well, beyond just like, hey, I want to make more money as Amplitude. It just tends to be harder for people to come in and just sell you the one thing you want and be the best version of that one thing. And so there are sort of systemic sort of tides against what we maybe as engineers want, but it just tends to work better and it's more effective.
Absolutely.
As a tool to scale up companies.
As we get towards the end, I think there's a couple of earlier points that you made that I want to comment on before we end up. Is that all right? So I think you asked like, why the hell am I not a product manager? I think it was like a very fair question. It's like a lot of former founders just go into product because then they could drive. So that's a great question. I think I'm just too misanthropic. I think I'm just I I think I don't know that I have the capacity for a product manager's level of shareholder buy-in and document writing. I've done product management work. I've certainly worn a product manager's shoes in all the years, just filling in, and it's a lot. And I have so much more. I work so much harder as a product manager than I ever did as an engineering manager, just in terms of and every week we have to write a report for this executive. And then every other week we have to write a report for this executive. And then we have to go to a cross-functional meeting where we present the thing. And I can do it, but I'm so happy to have my product counterparts doing that. I think the trade-off there is you don't own the roadmap. You get to contribute to it, but you don't own it. And the two things to that is, one, I think if you have a strong product engineering partnership, that isn't a real issue. I think if you get to a relationship between a product manager and engineering manager, that there's that mutual respect there. I end up being pretty happy with the roadmaps that we end up executing. One, and then two, just on an IC level, I think the best growth engineers are effectively mini PMs, and some of them do end up going into product manager roles. But some of them say, hey, I actually quite like just being able to run these experiments, and my PM gives me, my EM gives me enough autonomy that I can execute on this stuff, and I'm quite happy with it. I didn't become a manager for a number of years at Opendoor because, honestly, it wasn't an issue until the company got larger, right? I think, again, JD was my product manager for a while, and we had a weekly one-on-one, but there was just a lot of trust there, and so long as we were aligned on the priorities, I was good to execute.
Was there some part of it that you liked the building aspect? I built this thing and it did so well and brought so many customers and made millions of dollars. I know some product managers get that dopamine hit, but I tend to get it much more when I've contributed at least with a line of code or two.
Yeah, so absolutely, just knowing about the win and being part of the win is a great feeling. The other part of that is some of those wins could have only happened if it were you, right? A bunch of the ways we end up doing things, in the process, it's not I foresaw ahead of time exactly how we would solve this. It's while figuring out the exact problem, I end up finding the solution that I don't know that a generic cutter engineer would have found. And as a product manager, that's much harder for me to do because it's I guess they built it if they say it's hard, I guess it's hard, right? But as an engineer in the weeds, you can find what the elegant solution is.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think I also struggled with this sort of decision earlier in my career. I was CTO of my own company and then some early stage startup, and then I was done with startups for a little bit, and I was okay, I'm going to go into products. And so I actually did that. I did that for quite a few years as a product manager, and there was
I think you're just a lot more presentable than
a SaaS company.
Right? You're just a nice guy.
Yeah, it's the shirts. It's the shirts,
Yeah, exactly.
I
get to be a little thornier as an engineer and get away with it.
Yeah, what's funny is that the first role I was very bad at. I would say I was in everyone's face and quite rude, but somehow effective, which is why I kind of was able to be still in that role by the end of it. But by the end of it, when I was at Taplytics, which was head of product role, I actually asked them to still be able to code. And I was able to do both of those jobs, but just not well, obviously. It was an early company, and it was sub 20 people. But there is something special about... Yeah, let me backtrack, because I think the reason I was talking about this line of code commit thing and asking you that is because the thing that I find very interesting is just is code. Code feels very, for lack of a better word, beautiful to me. And that is what gets me excited. And then I have to put that in juxtaposition to my love of business effectively. And so that's kind of where I get stuck. It's I want to just do business, but code is pretty. And so then I get this tension exists. So I really feel it. And I think, I just also happen to be really social, like social dynamics, which it sounds like you're not as into. So I think both paths are pretty clear paths for me. But I think that's an interesting thing
for
to choose.
For burnt out startup CTOs, going into product is an absolutely reasonable solution. Going into growth engineering is also an absolutely reasonable solution. And also from growth engineering, you can go become a product manager. Like that is not an uncommon path. So you skip that step. I think it sounds like you would have enjoyed it quite a bit. And it sounds like the work you do now has gotten you like closer to it as well. But yeah, it certainly, it was a great path for me, and I would encourage others. I've hit a hard stop here. Do you mind if I do a little plug?
Go for it. Yeah, I want to talk about that last anyway. What are you up to now these days? Tell us about that.
So I'm doing two things. I moved to Japan, and so wound down my time at Masterclass in March. And I'm doing two things. One, I'm writing a book about growth engineering. I think there's not a ton of stuff out there there's a ton of stuff out there for growth. There's a ton of stuff out there for engineering. But as I was building curriculums for training in my organization, there's not a ton that I found that was growth engineering specific. So I'm going to try to write that first handbook. If you want to follow along, alexeymk.com. Come hang out. I'm putting early drafts up. And then second, I'm doing fractional consulting, which is basically, if you don't have a head of growth engineering yet, but you're starting to spin up that org, I can spend some time at a company and help. I think I might be booked up by the time this goes up, but always happy to chat with people if they're curious.
Yeah, that just means you're going to be even more expensive by the time they get to you. Alexey, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate this. I don't have a lot of people to talk to about this stuff, and I think you've definitely been one over the years, and I really, really appreciate having a mind like yours around. I'm excited for the book, and I really feel quite grateful for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Especially for waking up so early in Japan.
And likewise, you've been a great mentor to me, and I really appreciate anytime I can come to you. What the cool new thing that isn't census or high touch is.
Exactly. All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Yeah.
All right. And that's a wrap. Thank you, Alexey, for coming on such early hours and waking up early to do this podcast with me. I'm a big fan of his work. I think you really should be listening to this podcast and thinking, now, how do I hire these types of folks or build the process that he talked about in the episode? And having the different standards for growth engineering work compared to product engineering work, I think is a very hard thing to come to terms with. And he has very strong opinions there, opinions that I agree with. So I hope you've taken this away and are going to have some conversations internally about it. Up next, we're going to have Rodrigo Hott. He's the VP and GM at Viome. Life Sciences is a company that does quite interesting work. I learned a lot about the biotech space through that conversation, but also having someone who's sort of been a founder and now leading growth at a company where he understands the sort of full dynamics of an industry was honestly humbling, to say the least. So I'm excited for you to listen to that episode as well. It's coming up soon. See you on the next one.